was the kind of Christmas night that tested a soul. Snow falling endlessly, wind howling like a memory that wouldn't fade. A war veteran and his loyal dog were driving home when they saw a small figure collapsed in the storm. As the headlights cut through the white haze, they froze. A little girl, frail and trembling, was crawling through the snow. Her left leg missing, her hands reaching desperately toward a metal prosthetic glinting just beyond her grasp. No voice answered from the dark house behind her. And in that silence, the veteran did the only thing his heart could tell him. He lifted her from the cruel cold, not knowing that one act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. Because sometimes, all it takes is one human heart to turn a night of despair into a story of hope. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe no one deserves to be left behind, hit subscribe and stay with us for stories that prove compassion can still light the darkest nights. Wishing you peace and warmth wherever you are. It was Christmas Eve in Willow Creek, the kind of night where silence feels heavier than snow. The town slept under a thick white blanket, its rooftops bowed with frost, its streets emptied of laughter. The wind sang through the pine trees like a morning hymn, carrying the chill of loneliness. Far from the glowing windows of the church and the faint hum of distant carols, a truck made its way down the county road. Inside sat Jack Carter, a 42-year-old veteran with a calm face weathered by years of war and loss. His build was strong, his movements steady, the kind of man who had learned to carry weight without complaint. He wore his olive green field jacket zipped to the neck, the brim of his black cap marked with the word veteran. The silver dog tag resting against his chest tapped lightly with every bump of the road. Beside him, Rex, his 6-year-old German shepherd, sat upright in the passenger seat, a powerful animal with a sable coat, black saddle on his back, tan legs and amber eyes that gleamed with alertness. The truck's heater groaned against the cold, yet the air still carried a thin mist of their breath. Jack had spent the evening delivering coats and food to families in need, a quiet tradition since he'd left the service. Giving, he often said, was his way of feeling useful again. The road home stretched long and empty, framed by walls of snow and shadow. Rex's ears twitched at the faint whistle of wind, then stilled. Jack hummed softly to himself, fingers tightening on the steering wheel, thinking about the warm light waiting at home, the small cabin tucked against the forest line. But then, without warning, Rex's posture changed. The dog stiffened, muscles tensing, his nose lifting toward the frosted window. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Jack slowed the truck. "What is it, boy?" The question hung in the cold air. Rex's growl deepened into a bark, sharp and urgent, cutting through the sound of the storm. Jack's eyes followed the dog's stare toward the left side of the road, a faint movement in the snow, barely visible through the swirling white. For a second, he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a fallen branch. But then, the headlights caught a small figure, sprawled across the frozen ground, its limbs moving weakly. Jack's heart clenched. He slammed the brakes, the truck skidding slightly before stopping at the edge of the driveway. He threw open the door and stepped into the storm. The wind bit at his face, the cold immediate and merciless. Rex leaped out beside him, barking toward the figure. Jack trudged forward through the snow, boots sinking deep until he reached her. A child, no older than 8. She wore a thin beige polka dot dress with a faded red sweater and a woolen hat pulled crooked over her blonde hair. Her body was trembling violently, her face pale as porcelain, lips blue, eyes wide with silent terror. And then he saw it. Her left leg was missing. Below the knee, and just a few feet away, lay a metal prosthetic, half buried in the snow. The girl was crawling toward it, her small hands shaking, nails scraping against the ice as she tried to reach the leg that would let her stand again. She gasped weakly, her breath forming tiny clouds of frost, tears freezing before they could fall. Jack dropped to one knee, his gloved hand hovering over her shoulder, afraid even his touch might hurt. Hey, easy now," he said softly, his voice breaking through the wind. "You're all right. Where's your family, sweetheart?" But the child didn't answer. She only cried, a thin, soundless sob, too cold even for her voice to rise. Rex came closer, sniffing at her side, then whined softly as if urging Jack to hurry. Jack looked toward the small house nearby, its porch light dead, its windows dark. Snow had gathered thick against the door. He stood up and ran toward it, pounding his fist against the wood. "Hello!" he shouted, his voice carried away by the storm. "There's a child out here. She's hurt." No response. He pounded again, harder this time. Still nothing. No movement, no sound from inside. He glanced through the frosted window and saw only darkness. A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the weather. He turned back to see the little girl still lying where he had left her, her hand limp against the snow. He rushed to her side again, kneeling in the snow. The sight pierced him deeper than any wound he had ever carried. The girl's skin was ice cold to the touch. Her small chest rose and fell shallowly. Jack tore open his jacket, wrapped his arms around her, pressing her against the thick fabric still warm from the truck. "Hang in there, kid," he murmured, lifting her gently. She was lighter than she should have been, bones and chill and nothing else. Her head fell against his shoulder, and for a heartbeat, he thought she'd stopped breathing. Then a faint, shaky breath brushed his collar. "Good girl," he whispered, voice tight, as he turned and started toward the truck. Rex followed close behind, his fur already dusted white, his amber eyes locked on the girl as though he understood. The wind howled louder now, snow swirling in a frenzy around them. Jack pushed through, each step heavy, until he reached the truck and swung open the passenger door. He laid the girl carefully across the seat, her head resting on Rex's flank. The dog immediately pressed closer, wrapping his body around her small frame, sharing his warmth without a sound. Jack grabbed an old blanket from behind the seat, one he kept for cold nights like this, and tucked it around her. Her fingers twitched, clutching the edge of the blanket as though afraid it might disappear. Jack turned the heater to its highest setting, his breath fogging the windshield. For a long second, he just sat there, staring through the storm at the lifeless house. Questions churned through his mind: who had left her there, why she was alone, what could drive someone to abandon a child on a night like this. But the answers didn't matter now. Not yet. The only thing that mattered was getting her warm, getting her safe. Rex let out a quiet whine, glancing up at Jack. The man nodded. "We're going home, boy." The truck's engine roared back to life, tires crunching through the thickening snow. As they pulled away, the headlights caught the last glimpse of the house, dark, empty, and half buried under the storm. Behind them, the wind erased their footprints, the world swallowing every trace of what had happened. Jack tightened his grip on the steering wheel, glancing at the child beside him. Her breathing steadied slightly, her small hand still resting on Rex's fur. The road ahead was long and invisible, swallowed by snow, but Jack didn't slow down. The heater's hum filled the silence, broken only by Rex's steady breathing and the faint rattle of chains on the truck's tires. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cab there was a fragile sense of hope, a flicker of warmth in the heart of winter. Jack's gaze shifted from the road to the girl's face, pale and still. Somewhere deep in his chest, something stirred, a memory, perhaps, or a promise he didn't know he'd made. Whatever it was, it tightened his throat and kept his hands firm on the wheel. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't leave her behind. As the truck climbed the last hill before the woods, the snow began to fall softer, the night easing its grip just a little. The headlights cut through the storm like a pair of unwavering eyes, guiding them toward the faint outline of Jack's cabin in the distance. Inside, a fire would soon be lit, blankets would thaw the frost from her skin, and the long silence she carried might finally break. For now, there was only the road, the storm, and the quiet promise of a man who had once been taught how to save lives, and was now learning what it meant to save a soul. The storm followed them through the woods, whispering against the windows of Jack's cabin as if unwilling to let them go. When he pushed open the door, the familiar creak of old hinges echoed through the small wooden house, a sound that had once meant solitude, but tonight it meant shelter. The cabin stood near the tree line, its walls lined with books, a few photographs, and the remnants of a soldier's quiet life. Jack carried the little girl inside and laid her gently on the old couch near the fireplace. The air was still cold, so he moved quickly, tossing logs into the hearth and striking a match. Within moments, the fire came alive, licking the wood with orange light, casting warmth and shadows across the room. Rex settled by the girl's side, his head resting near her small hand, his body coiled like a guardian against the cold that still clung to her clothes. Jack took a kettle from the counter and filled it with water from the thermos he'd left earlier. His hands, rough and scarred, trembled slightly as he set it over the flame. He wasn't sure why his heart was racing. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the sight of a child so small, so fragile, trembling beside his dog. He knelt beside her again. The light from the fire revealed more than he wished to see. Her dress was damp, torn at the hem, her woolen hat soaked through. Her hair was tangled and stuck to her cheeks, and her lips moved slightly, though no words came out. Jack adjusted the blanket over her shoulders and spoke softly. "You're safe now, kiddo." It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was the closest thing he could offer. When the kettle whistled, he poured a mug of warm water and brought it to her, sitting down by the fire. For a while he said nothing. He'd learned that silence sometimes helped more than words. The girl's eyes followed the flames, her small fingers clutching the blanket as though afraid it might vanish. On the rug nearby lay her metal leg, polished but cold, its edges dusted with snow. Jack glanced at it, then back at her. "What's your name?" he asked gently. There was no answer at first, only the crackle of firewood. Then, after what felt like a full minute, a whisper came, fragile, like a breath that had waited too long to be heard. Emily." Jack nodded slowly, his expression softening. "All right, Emily, you're safe here." The words hung in the warm air, sinking into the room like an unspoken vow. Jack stood and walked toward the phone mounted on the kitchen wall, the cord twisted from years of use. He dialed the number of the only person he trusted for situations like this, Clara Monroe, a retired nurse who lived 2 houses down the ridge. Clara was 60, a woman with gentle hands and a face lined by both kindness and fatigue. When she arrived 20 minutes later, snow still clinging to her cardigan, she didn't ask questions at first. Her eyes took in the scene, the trembling child, the fire. Jack standing nearby with a look she hadn't seen in years. She knelt beside the girl without hesitation, her voice calm and steady. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Emily's eyes fluttered open, but she didn't speak. Clara brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead and felt her pulse. "Cold, but strong," she murmured, mostly to herself. Jack helped Clara remove the soaked clothes carefully, wrapping the girl in a clean blanket. As Clara worked, she froze for a moment, her face tightening. Beneath the child's thin shirt were bruises, deep, uneven, old and new, overlapping like layers of pain. There were faint marks near her shoulder blades and a purplish band around her wrist. Jack noticed Clara's silence and understood without words. "Those aren't from falling," she said finally, her voice low. Jack's jaw clenched. The fire cracked louder, as though echoing his anger. Clara sighed, adjusting the blanket to cover the girl's back again. "She's been through a lot," she whispered. "I'll clean the scrapes, but this is something else." Rex, who had been lying near the door, lifted his head and gave a soft growl, sensing the heaviness in the room. Jack crouched beside him, placing a hand on his fur. "Easy, boy." Then, turning to Clara, he asked, "Can you stay with her a while? I need to make a call." She nodded, pulling a chair closer to the couch. Jack picked up the phone again and dialed the sheriff's office. It rang twice before a young voice answered, Deputy Cole Matthews, one of the newer officers in Willow Creek. Cole was around 30, earnest and level-headed, the kind of man who still believed small towns could hold big decency. "Jack, everything all right?" he asked. "No," Jack replied quietly. "I found a girl out in the snow, about 8 years old. She's hurt, not just from the cold." Within minutes, Cole was on his way. When he arrived, brushing the snow from his dark navy jacket, the clock above the mantel read past midnight. He took off his hat, his eyes landing first on Emily, then on the prosthetic leg resting beside the couch. "Good Lord," he muttered. Clara stood, explaining the injuries in a measured tone, while Jack filled in the rest, in where he found her, the house, the unanswered door. Cole took notes silently, the pencil trembling once when he heard the part about the empty home. "I'll check with the county," he said finally. "If she's from around here, there'll be a record. School, guardianship, something." As Cole stepped aside to make the call, Clara knelt again by Emily and whispered soft words that only mothers remember, words that calm fear even when meaning fades. Emily's eyelids fluttered, then closed. For the first time since she'd been found, she slept. The fire's glow deepened, painting the room in soft gold. Jack leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching both of them, the nurse who had seen too much sorrow and the child who had known too little mercy. The world outside roared with snow, but inside, the storm's voice grew faint. Cole returned after a few minutes, his expression grim. "I found her name in a county welfare file," he said. "Emily Brooks. Guardian listed as Martha Brooks. Aunt or stepmother, it's not clear. She's got a record, Jack. Neglect, physical abuse. Case dismissed last year due to lack of evidence." The words hung like frost in the air. Jack's stomach tightened. Clara shook her head in disbelief. "How does that even happen?" she muttered. Cole sighed. "Small towns forget fast. People turn away when they should look closer." Jack said nothing. He walked to the window and looked out at the forest, where the snow had begun to slow, flakes drifting like ash in the air. "We'll keep her here tonight," he said finally. "She needs rest, warmth, people who don't hurt her." Cole nodded. "I'll file the report in the morning. The storm's blocking the roads anyway," Clara agreed softly, checking the girl's pulse one more time before standing. "She's stable now," she said, "but she'll wake up afraid. Don't let her see you angry, Jack. Kids like her, they can smell anger from a mile away." Jack's lips curved into something between a smile and a sigh. "I'll try." The night wore on quietly. Cole took his leave, promising to return at dawn. Clara tidied her kit, leaving a few bandages and a bottle of ointment on the table. Jack walked her to the door, thanking her with a nod more sincere than words. When she disappeared into the white outside, the cabin felt smaller, but not empty. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing faintly. Jack turned to Rex, who hadn't moved from his spot beside the couch. The dog's eyes met his, alert, questioning, loyal. "Stay close," Jack whispered. Rex thumped his tail once, a quiet promise in return. Jack sat down in the old armchair across from the couch. The room was filled with the soft crackle of the dying fire and the faint sound of Emily's breathing. Her prosthetic leg rested near the hearth, the metal now catching the warmth. Jack watched it gleam for a while, his thoughts heavy but steady. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that this night had already changed something in him. Outside, the storm drifted into silence, and inside, for the first time in years, the small cabin felt like a home again, fragile, uncertain, but alive beneath the glow of firelight. Morning broke with a pale light crawling through the frost-covered windows, quiet and fragile, as if afraid to disturb the warmth that had returned to Jack's cabin. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so thick that even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Jack stood by the table, pouring himself a cup of black coffee, his eyes glancing now and then at the couch where Emily slept. She was still curled beneath the blanket, her small frame barely visible, the prosthetic leg resting beside her as though it too needed rest. Rex lay at her feet, his breathing slow and steady, one ear always tilted toward her like a sentinel who refused to sleep. Jack's thoughts circled back to the dark house by the roadside, to the unanswered door, to the questions that now demanded more than silence. He set down the cup, slipped on his olive jacket, and picked up his keys. "Stay close," he told Rex quietly. The dog rose immediately, stretching before following him to the door. The air outside was sharp, the kind that stung the lungs and cleared the head. The truck's engine groaned to life, reluctant in the cold, and soon they were rolling back down the snow-covered trail toward the place where everything had begun. The world was still half asleep under its blanket of white, the sky a dull gray that hid the sun. As they approached the lonely house, Jack felt something shift inside him, that uneasy stillness that soldiers learn to recognize before stepping into a room that no longer feels safe. The house looked even smaller in daylight. Snow had piled against its steps, and icicles clung to the eaves like teeth. Jack pushed the truck door open and stepped into the snow. Rex jumped out beside him, tail low, nose to the ground. The front door hung slightly ajar, creaking when the wind brushed past it. Jack frowned. He remembered closing it last night before leaving with Emily. He reached for the handle, but before he could touch it, Rex moved toward the side of the house, barking once, low, controlled, a warning. Jack followed, his boots crunching against the frozen crust until they reached the back door. It was open, just a crack, the hinges frozen in place. He pushed it slowly, and the sound of the wood scraping against the frame echoed through the hollow interior. The air inside was heavy and stale, carrying the faint smell of alcohol and old cigarettes. The room was dim, despite the light filtering through the frosted window. On the table sat a half-finished bowl of rice, stiff with cold, next to a bottle of cheap whiskey, left uncapped. A cigarette had burned out in the ashtray, its smoke long gone. Jack moved carefully, his eyes scanning the space. A single chair overturned, a pair of muddy boots near the door, and beside the window, a torn jacket draped over a chair. Nothing stirred. The silence was too complete. He stepped closer to the table, noting a small piece of paper near the edge, a bus ticket, wrinkled and damp, marked with the route Willow Creek, Idaho Falls, time-stamped just before midnight. Jack exhaled, his breath misting in the cold air. "So you ran," he murmured to himself. He picked up the ticket and turned it over in his hand. It didn't take much to understand. Whoever the woman was, Martha Brooks, Emily's supposed guardian, she had left as soon as the storm covered her tracks, left a child to die in the snow and caught the last bus out of town. Jack's jaw tightened, his teeth grinding against the thought. He searched the counter next, finding a stack of unopened letters, some marked with government seals. The top envelope bore the logo of the county welfare office. Inside was a check, Child Disability Assistance, Emily Brooks. The signature line below read, Martha Brooks. The amount wasn't large, but it was enough to make her crime clear. Rex padded through the room, nose close to the floor, tail rigid. He stopped near the small wooden table and sniffed under it, then pawed gently at something caught in the shadows. Jack crouched down and reached beneath the table, pulling out a small notebook with a faded pink cover, edges frayed, pages stiff with cold. He opened it carefully. Inside, the handwriting was small and uneven, as if written by a child trying to make sense of a world too cruel for her. The first page read, "If I walk faster, she won't yell. If I smile, she'll stop looking angry. I promise I'll go faster. I'll be better." Jack's chest tightened as he turned another page. The ink here was smudged, blurred by what might have been tears or water. The last entry was short, only one sentence. "I will go faster, so Mama won't be mad anymore." He closed the notebook slowly, his hand lingering on the worn cover. "You poor kid," he whispered. Rex sat beside him, pressing his head against Jack's arm, as if to steady him. The dog's quiet presence grounded him, as it always had. Jack stood, scanning the room once more, then took out his phone and dialed Cole Matthews. The deputy answered quickly, his tone alert. "Jack?" "The house is empty," Jack said. "Back door open, food on the table, bottle of whiskey, and a bus ticket heading to Idaho. I found her welfare paperwork, all under Martha Brooks's name, and something else. A notebook. It's Emily's." There was a pause on the line. Then Cole replied, "I'll be there in 20. Don't touch anything." Jack nodded, though he was already sure nothing here was left worth hiding. He waited outside, leaning against the porch railing, eyes fixed on the trail that led away from the house. Snow began to fall again, light but steady, the kind that seemed to erase more than it covered. When Cole's truck finally appeared, the sound of tires on gravel felt louder than it should. The deputy climbed out, his breath visible in the cold. "You weren't kidding," he said after stepping inside. He examined the table, the bus ticket, the welfare letter, and the half-empty bottle. "Looks like she packed up in a hurry, left everything that didn't matter to her." Jack handed him the notebook. Cole flipped through it, his face tightening with every line he read. "God," he muttered, closing it. "You think she took the bus last night?" Jack nodded. It was the last route before the storm hit. She had time. Cole pulled out his radio and called it in, giving the details to the dispatcher. Jack listened in silence, watching Rex circle the room once more, nose twitching at the scent of the woman who'd fled. The deputy ended the call and turned back. "We'll alert Idaho Falls and the next few towns along the line. She can't get far." Jack didn't answer. He was staring at a photograph on the counter, a cracked frame showing a much younger Emily, smiling awkwardly beside the same woman whose name was on the welfare checks. There was something off in the picture. The woman's eyes distant, her hand gripping the child's shoulder too tightly, as if holding her in place. Jack set the frame down gently, his fingers brushing the cracked glass. When Cole finished taking photographs for evidence, he looked around the room one last time. "We've got enough here for the sheriff to open a case. Abandonment, welfare fraud, abuse." Jack nodded. "That's a start." His voice was steady, but the quiet anger beneath it was hard to miss. Outside, Rex barked once, standing by the truck. The message was clear. Time to leave. Cole gathered the documents in the notebook into a plastic bag, tucking them under his arm. "I'll file this before noon," he said. "You should head back. Make sure Clara keeps an eye on Emily. She'll need time." Jack gave a short nod, glancing back at the darkened house. "There's something about this place," he murmured. "Even the light doesn't want to stay." They left the door half open as they walked back to their trucks, letting the cold wind sweep through. The snow had begun to fall heavier now, covering their footprints almost as soon as they made them. Jack started the engine and looked one last time at the house, the empty window, the still chair, the flicker of shadow that might have been memory or guilt. He didn't know. But as the truck turned toward the forest road, he felt the weight of the small notebook in his coat pocket. He hadn't told Cole, but he had slipped one page from it before handing it over, the one that read, "I'll go faster so Mama won't be mad anymore." He couldn't explain why, maybe because some truths deserved to stay close to the heart, at least for a while. The afternoon light had already begun to fade when the call came. Jack was sitting at the edge of his porch, the quiet hum of the wind through the trees filling the space between thoughts, when the ring of the old landline broke through the stillness. He rose, slow but certain, and picked up the receiver. Cole's voice came sharp through the static, tense, urgent, the kind of tone a man used only when the truth was close enough to touch. "We've got her," he said. "Martha Brooks." A ticket clerk recognized her on the early bus heading north. The driver confirmed she got off at a rest stop near the state line. The pause that followed carried the weight of every unanswered question. "We leave in 20 minutes. Jack didn't hesitate. "I'm coming with you." Rex was already standing by the door before Jack reached for his coat. The dog's ears were pricked, eyes sharp, as though he understood exactly what was about to happen. The sky outside was bruised with the colors of an early winter evening, pale violet sinking into gray. The snow had started again, soft flakes swirling like ash. Jack zipped his olive jacket to the collar, the silver dog tag cold against his chest, and grabbed his gloves. He glanced toward the cabin, where the faint outline of the couch could be seen through the window. Emily was sleeping under Clara's watch, her small frame wrapped tightly in a blanket. For a fleeting moment, Jack wondered what she would dream about. Warmth, perhaps, or silence without fear. He turned away before that thought could stay too long. The drive north was long and quiet, the kind of silence that didn't ask for words. Cole sat behind the wheel, his young face marked with focus, the radio hissing faintly between transmissions. Jack rode shotgun, Rex in the back seat, his head turned toward the window, watching the endless stretch of white that blurred past. The snow deepened as they climbed higher into the mountain pass, and the air turned colder, sharper. Every few miles, Cole checked in with dispatch. "Bus route 209. Last seen pulling over at Pine Ridge Station. Possible suspect traveling alone. Female, mid-40s. The reply came back. "Copy that. Local patrol notified." Jack's hands tightened on his knees. He wasn't sure if it was anger or resolve that kept him from speaking. By the time they reached the rest stop, the sky had fallen into night. The place was half buried in snow. A flickering neon sign that read, "Open," hung crooked over a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. Two long-haul trucks idled near the gas pumps, their engines humming softly in the dark. Cole parked near the entrance, the tires crunching against the ice. "Stay sharp," he said quietly, and Jack nodded. Rex leapt from the car, his paws sinking into the snow, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the cold air. The wind carried faint scents, diesel, coffee, wet fabric, and something else. Something familiar that made the dog's ears twitch. Inside, the diner was dim but warm. A handful of travelers sat at the counter, their faces weary, half lit by the glow of the jukebox in the corner. Jack scanned the room once, twice, before his eyes landed on a shape near the back booth. A woman with graying hair pulled into a bun, a heavy coat that looked borrowed rather than owned, and a small duffel bag at her feet. She was stirring her coffee, eyes fixed on the table as though afraid of her own reflection. Cole's hand went to the badge on his belt. Jack felt Rex tense beside him, the dog's attention locked on the bag. A faint whimper escaped him, the same sound he made when he'd found Emily in the snow. That was all it took. They moved in quietly, Cole approaching from the aisle while Jack circled behind. The woman looked up only when Rex growled low in his throat. Her eyes widened, first in shock, then in something colder. Defiance, perhaps, or the realization that the past had finally caught her. "Martha Brooks," Cole said, his voice level. She said nothing, only reached for the bag instinctively, but Rex was faster. The dog stepped forward, paw pressing against the duffel, nose brushing the zipper. Jack bent down, pulling it open. Inside was a child's jacket, small, pink, frayed at the cuffs. He recognized it immediately. Emily's jacket. "Where did you get this?" Jack asked quietly. Martha's lips curled into a faint sneer. "It's hers," she said flatly. "It doesn't matter anymore." Cole took her by the arm as she stood, her chair scraping harshly against the linoleum. "You're under arrest for child endangerment, abuse, and welfare fraud." She didn't resist, not in the usual way. Instead, she let out a bitter laugh that cut through the room. "Abuse," she said. "That little cripple was a burden from the day she came into my house. You think I didn't try? You think anyone wanted her?" The words hung in the air like frost, sharp and ugly. Jack's jaw tightened, his eyes hard as flint. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he stepped closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "She's not a burden," he said. "She's a life, one you tried to throw away." The officers outside took her from Cole, handcuffs glinting in the beam of the patrol car lights. Rex stood at Jack's side, ears flat, body rigid. The woman kept talking, fragments of excuses, curses, the hollow justifications of someone who had forgotten how to feel. Jack didn't listen. He stood still, watching as they placed her in the back of the cruiser. The door shut with a heavy thud that sounded, for the first time, final. Cole returned from the patrol car, his breath visible in the cold. "She'll be processed tonight," he said. "The sheriff will hold her until transfer. You did good, Jack." But Jack shook his head slowly. "No," he murmured. "I just did what anyone should have done." They searched the bag more thoroughly before leaving. Along with Emily's jacket, they found her small notebook, the same one Jack had turned in, though this copy had additional pages torn from it. Cole bagged the evidence while Jack stared at the faint writing on the inside cover. "Property of Emily Brooks." His hands tightened until the edges of the paper bent. He didn't know why she'd taken it. Maybe guilt, maybe a reminder of control, but it didn't matter now. The rest stop had gone quiet again, the snow covering footprints faster than they could be made. Somewhere down the road, a bus engine hummed, carrying strangers toward warmer places. The drive back was long, the storm tapering into a gentle fall. Cole drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting against his chin. Rex lay stretched out in the back, his head between his paws, eyes half closed, but never fully at ease. Jack watched the snow through the windshield, his reflection faint against the glass. He thought of Emily again, the way her small hand had clung to the blanket last night, the way her eyes followed the firelight without fear for the first time. For reasons he couldn't explain, that image steadied him more than any word ever could. By the time they reached Willow Creek, the town was asleep under a sheet of quiet snow. Cole dropped Jack off at his cabin before heading to file the report. Jack opened the door to the familiar warmth of the fire, Rex padding in beside him. Clara was sitting near the couch, knitting silently while Emily dozed beneath the blanket. She looked up and smiled when she saw them. "Long night?" she asked softly. Jack nodded. "But it's over." At the sound of Rex's paws on the floor, Emily stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. When she saw the dog, she pushed herself up, tears filling her eyes faster than words could follow. Rex trotted over and placed his head gently on her lap, Emily threw her arms around his neck, sobbing quietly, her fingers buried in his fur. Jack watched from across the room, his throat tightening with something that wasn't sorrow, not anymore. Outside, the wind had softened, and the first hint of dawn began to color the sky. Word would spread soon about the girl found in the snow, the soldier who carried her home, the woman brought to justice. But for now there was only the sound of a child's quiet breathing and the steady rhythm of a dog's heartbeat. And in that small cabin at the edge of the woods, for the first time in a long time, peace felt real again. Winter loosened its grip on Willow Creek slowly, as if reluctant to leave. The snow no longer fell in thick, blinding waves, but drifted in quiet flakes that softened rooftops and rested gently on the pines. Weeks had passed since the night the woman was taken away, and though the storm outside had calmed, a smaller storm lingered inside the little cabin by the woods. Emily still flinched at the sound of doors closing, still woke at times when the wind pressed too hard against the window. But Rex was always there, the steady rhythm of his breathing beside her bed, the warmth of his fur pressed against her small hands. When she startled awake, his amber eyes would open too, calm and constant, and that alone was enough to steady her trembling. Jack moved about the house with a kind of patience he had never known before. His life, once built on rigid schedules and silent mornings, now followed the quiet rhythms of a child's recovery. He learned to move slower, to explain more gently, to smile when Emily tried to hide her fear behind small, brave nods. The cabin itself had changed too. The walls, once bare, now carried small signs of life. A pair of crutches leaned beside the door, a half-finished drawing taped near the fireplace, and a wooden bowl on the table filled with scraps of paper where Emily wrote down new words she wanted to learn. Sometimes, when she slept, Jack would read them aloud under his breath. Safe, trust, home. Words that had once felt far away. One crisp morning, Jack carried something from his truck, a narrow wooden box wrapped in burlap. Emily sat by the fire, her leg tucked beneath the blanket, watching with curiosity as he set it on the table. Inside lay a newly fitted prosthetic, its metal frame polished, the padding lined with soft leather. Clara had helped adjust it through a local medical center, and Jack had spent nights sanding the edges smooth so it wouldn't hurt. Emily hesitated when he knelt in front of her, the tool belt still around his waist, his voice low and careful. "We'll go slow, all right?" She nodded, though her eyes glistened. The first step was small, a trembling reach, a wobbly balance, and then another. Rex followed each movement with intense concentration, his tail twitching but his body still, as if he knew that any sound might break her courage. The days that followed became a quiet rhythm of practice and laughter. Emily learned to walk again, one careful step at a time, her crutches clicking softly against the wooden floor. Jack marked her progress on the doorframe with a pencil, tiny notches that grew taller as the weeks passed. Each time she fell, Rex would nudge her shoulder and sit beside her until she tried again. Some evenings, when the fire burned low and the world outside turned silver under moonlight, Jack would read aloud from one of the old books he'd kept from his army days, stories about perseverance, about second chances. Emily listened, chin resting on her hands, her eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. One evening, as the snow whispered against the windows, a knock came at the door. Cole Matthews stood there, his face red from the cold, his uniform dusted with frost. He smiled faintly, holding a folded envelope. "Got news," he said, stepping inside. The warmth of the cabin fogged his glasses as he handed the paper to Jack. The veteran read it slowly, his eyes narrowing at first, then softening. It was an official letter. Temporary custody granted, Jack Carter. Cole placed a hand on his shoulder. "The court reviewed everything. She's yours for now, pending full evaluation. The judge said it wasn't a hard choice." Jack didn't speak for a moment. He just looked toward the small girl sitting cross-legged on the rug, Rex's head in her lap. When she smiled up at him, shy but certain, he finally found his voice. "Looks like you're stuck with me, kiddo." The news spread quietly through Willow Creek. Folks in town began leaving small things by the cabin gate, a box of cookies, a knit scarf, an old children's book with a note that simply read, "Welcome home, Emily." Clara visited often, bringing warm soup and motherly advice Jack didn't know he needed. The little cabin, once a place for a man and his dog, now breathed with new life. On weekends, Jack taught Emily how to carve wood, her small hands steadying over his as they shaped pieces of pine into toys. The scent of sawdust mixed with smoke became the cabin's new perfume. One day, when she asked if they could make something together for someone who's gone, Jack understood without needing to ask who she meant. They spent a week crafting a small wooden boat from scraps of cedar. Jack carved the hull, while Emily painted the sides with streaks of blue and white. She wanted it to float strong enough to carry wishes, she said. On its deck, she glued a small wooden heart, and with careful, uneven letters she etched, "To Mom, I'm safe now." Jack said nothing, just watched her carve the words, each one slow and deliberate, like an offering of forgiveness he wasn't sure the world deserved. When the boat was done, they placed it by the window, where sunlight fell through the frost and made it glow faintly each morning. As the months turned and snow began to fall again, Christmas crept quietly into Willow Creek. The town square lit up with lanterns, and bells rang from the chapel, echoing through the valley. On the night of Christmas Eve, Jack loaded the truck with a blanket and the small wooden boat, while Emily bundled in her thick pink coat, her new scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Rex jumped into the back, tail wagging as if he too knew where they were going. They drove toward the frozen lake beyond the woods, the same place where the wind once howled and fear had found them. Now, under a sky heavy with stars, it felt like a place reborn. The ice stretched wide and still, its surface glittering under moonlight. Jack broke a thin layer near the edge and set the boat down carefully. Emily crouched beside him, her gloved fingers tracing the little heart on its deck. Rex stood close, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "Ready?" Jack asked softly. Emily nodded, her eyes shimmering. Together they lit the small candle fixed inside the boat, shielding the flame from the wind. Then, with a gentle push, they let it drift. The tiny flame wavered, then steadied, gliding slowly across the black water beneath the ice. For a long time, none of them spoke. The candle's light danced across the lake, reflected in the ripples of ice and in the eyes of the little girl who had once been lost to darkness. The flame grew smaller as it drifted farther, until it looked like a star resting just below the surface of the world. Emily leaned against Jack's arm, her head resting against his sleeve, and whispered, "She's not angry anymore." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder and smiled, not to answer, but to let her believe. Rex sat beside them, his tail brushing gently against the snow, the only sound in that vast silence. When the flame finally disappeared into the horizon, the night felt softer somehow. The wind carried no cry, only peace. Jack looked down at Emily and saw for the first time not the frightened child from the storm, but a girl whose eyes held both pain and resilience, light born from what had nearly destroyed her. He knew the road ahead would still have its cold nights, but the warmth in this moment was enough to keep them all moving forward. Behind them, the footprints they left shimmered faintly beneath the starlight, the kind of marks that no storm could ever erase. Sometimes, the world changes not through grand gestures, but through quiet acts of compassion no one sees. Somewhere out there, a soldier still keeps his promise, a child still believes in kindness, and a loyal dog still stands guard beside a soul who once felt forgotten. It reminds us that love is not always loud. It is patient, steady, and often born in the coldest nights. If this story touched something in your heart, take a moment to share what you feel in the comments below. Your words may be the warmth someone else needs tonight. And if you believe the world still has room for goodness, for people who choose empathy over indifference, we invite you to stay with us, to listen, to remember. Subscribe, share, and may God bless you and all those who carry quiet courage in their hearts.